Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special session that has been prepared in collaboration with Women in Hydrogen. My name is, thank you, Catherine. My name is Ivana Jemelkova, and I'm a senior managing director. Ladies, feel free to sit down. And I'm a senior managing director with FTI Consulting. I've been in hydrogen for 13 years, which I do or do not admit based on the audience, so I feel safe with you. As you can tell, I have thoroughly enjoyed day one of the summit because my voice is cracking, and I hope it will last at least through this session. And it's going to be a really good one. So thank you so much for coming. We're delighted to have you here. And we have an incredible panel here, true experts on DC policy. So I think we're all very eager to hear from them. But before I give them the floor, I also wanted to speak a little bit about women in hydrogen. And we have two amazing networks, one here in the United States and one in Europe, both working to connect, highlight and empower women in this space. And I will give the floor to my colleague Sandy in just a moment to tell you a bit more about the network, the resources and the opportunities that are available for yourself or for your colleagues. And before we do that, I wanted to stay true to the spirit of Women in Hydrogen and wanted to invite you all to play a little game with us. It's very simple, don't worry. But literally, I need you to turn to the nearest person, maybe on your left, just to keep it simple, and you will have 2 minutes to just say who you are, what you do, and make a new connection. Maybe a professional connection, maybe a new friend, who knows. So over to you, 2 minutes, find somebody new in hydrogen somewhere in this room.
Great.
Nice to see
Takes
you.
the pressure off.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Yeah.
Are we introducing, are we going to do an
So first I will give the floor to Sandy. She will do her thing, and then I will turn to you, and I will do one by one, and I will let you introduce yourself.
Great. So we are going to introduce ourselves, so Sandy will talk, and then we'll come back.
We're doing like a bridge version, like 30-second intro.
No, I think when she starts talking.
She's going to introduce herself to me.
Oh boy.
Ready for energy.
Yeah, okay. Oh boy. All right. What's keeping me in it? The excitement.
I know I was on one of them, and I know I did an event.
I feel like we need to start a like hydrogen Reddit thread where like, anonymous like,
Right,
rumors just proliferate. And,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The good news is there's no hydrogen rumors at all. So
No, I mean,
Yes, I did.
if you're in this
Can't
space,
imagine.
it can be quite the...
Yeah.
You as well. So. And I find I'm not hugely great at facial recognition. It's not one of my talents. And I find it harder on the screen to recognize people I've met on the screen, and then remember, like, I met the plant managers for our 2 Canadian plants at a leadership event. We were
It's quite loud.
and I've
Yeah.
only ever seen them on video because of the COVID year.
Okay,
right?
this is working so well.
I didn't recognize them immediately in person.
This is working so super well, we might just let you
by all
chat.
means, they have the floor, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. This clearly seems to be working, so thank you for playing with us, and I hope you met someone new or reconnected with an old hydrogen friend. And I'm also delighted to introduce our first speaker. We will have a special contribution by Safro at the Edison Electric Institute, and I have to tell you a little bit the story. Sandy is actually one of the co-founders of the American Women in Hydrogen group. We call them Women Plus in Hydrogen. I don't know if Sandy will go into that, but she will explain a little bit about what is available, how you can be a part of it, how you can help your colleagues be a part of it, and again, what resources and opportunities exist. So Sandy, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ivana. And thank you, first of all, to the Summit for hosting us today. It's wonderful to have a platform to talk about Women Plus in Hydrogen and the opportunities available for women to network in the hydrogen space. We're just going to very briefly talk about Women plus and hydrogen because I, like I'm sure all of you, am really excited to hear this panel, so keep it brief. If you have questions, please come find me at the end. I'm also going to pass around some flyers with QR codes with information to link to find us on LinkedIn, which I'll talk a little bit more about as well. Or you can find my information on EEI's website and just send me an email as well. Women Plus and Hydrogen is an informal group that, as Ivana mentioned, is really primarily, oh, I'm sorry.
Your mic isn't picking up.
Oh, no, it's okay. And I don't have the best projecting voice. Hopefully this is better. Can everybody hear me now? Okay. So Women Plus and Hydrogen is an informal group that is primarily intended to create a space for those who identify as female in the hydrogen sector to connect and collaborate with each other. But we also have a number of events like this panel where we welcome allies and champions to join us as well. As Ivana mentioned, when Martinez of the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance and I formed this group about 3 years ago, so kind of in the midst of the pandemic, we were a really small group. It was a handful of women who met periodically, but with the help of many of our members, I can proudly say that we are now a network of almost 550 women. I'm going to talk briefly about 2 of our regular activities and then ways to connect with us, but I also want to mention that as conferences are going in person more and more, we are doing more events like this. So there are tons of opportunities to connect with women in this network, and we post information about our ongoing or our upcoming events on the 2 LinkedIn pages that I'm going to talk about. The first activity is our monthly networking calls. We have them on the 2nd Friday of every month, so we have one coming up next Friday. And if you're ever wondering to yourself, gosh, when is that next Women Plus and Hydrogen call? Just think about the 2 in H2 because that is the very nerdy reason why we chose the 2nd Friday of every month. They're virtual calls, so you can connect from wherever you are, and they are open to all who identify as female. We do everything on these calls from talk about what we're working on to talk about industry developments, ask questions that maybe were burning questions in the backs of our minds, share job opportunities, and more recently we've started to have our members present a little bit more formally on what their companies or organizations are doing, and I see actually a couple of women in the audience who have done that already. And a few times we've had some outside speakers come and join us as well. These are informal, truly zero pressure networking opportunities. We know everybody's busy. Join us when you can. Jump off if you need to. Truly, truly no judgment. The second event that I want to talk about is our annual event celebrating International Women's Day and Women's History Month. And I cannot talk about this without thanking Ivana for bringing the idea to the Women in Hydrogen group and also for the support that her organization, FTI, and she has provided over the years for this event. It is a half-day event in March. We have substantive panels with all female speakers and networking opportunities. It is open to all who identify as female as well as allies and champions. And this year, so in 2023, we were so excited for the first time to be able to move from just a virtual event to a hybrid event, and we were very fortunate to be able to use FTI's beautiful space here in Washington, D.C. for the in-person portion. We had over 70 women join us in person, including many of you in the audience today, and over 160 women and allies and champions from around the world join us virtually. We have had truly amazing female speakers as part of this event over the last 3 years from both government and industry, and as I was preparing my notes for this, excuse me, I was starting to write down the names of the women that I wanted to mention who were speakers at this event over the last 3 years and realized that I would have spent the entire 5 minutes listing their names. So decided not to do that, but be on the lookout because we are planning to do this event again in 2024, March 2024. So mark that on your calendars. Mark the whole month right now. No, just kidding. We'll put out information about the date fairly soon. So if any of this sounds like it would be of interest to you or to any of your colleagues or people that you know in the industry, there are 2 very easy ways to connect with us. They are both on LinkedIn, which makes it hopefully easy for everybody. The first is through our LinkedIn networking group, which is a space that we reserve for all who identify as female. It is a discussion forum, a place where women can chat over LinkedIn, where we post information about our events as well. The second is our LinkedIn main page, or I think LinkedIn calls it a company page. And we post information there about all of our upcoming events. That is open to all who identify as female, as well as allies and champions. So look for us on there. I will pass around these papers with our QR codes, but if you are not a QR code person, you can just go to LinkedIn and type in Women Plus and Hydrogen, and we'll come up. So thank you very much for the opportunity to chat about women in hydrogen. And Ivana, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. And we would be amiss not to mention our European sister group, Women in Green Hydrogen. They have some funding from German government, so they have to do the green. But you get the idea. So women in green hydrogen in Europe. Literally Google them, find an amazing platform with a mentorship program, an expert database with something like 500 women, and again, join for more opportunities and events. With all of that, thank you so much again for joining. Here is our distinguished panel, and I promise you women in hydrogen have the best intel and the best insight, so this is the panel where you need to be during this conference to learn something new and surprising and interesting. All right, so no pressure, ladies. I figured we could start with little introductions, and again, in the spirit of Women in Hydrogen, we'll try to be a little bit more personal about and talk about the individuals behind the brands. So obviously, we'd love to hear all about Breakthrough Energy and Cummins and CF Industries, but I think we're all also very eager to learn more about Maria, Traci, and Linda. So with that, I'll give the floor to Maria, and maybe we can move this way. What's your hydrogen story? Why are you in hydrogen? And as we joked with Maria, what's keeping you in hydrogen? That might be a good question too.
Should I use the mic?
Yeah. Okay.
This is fine?
This
Okay.
one? Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Great. So I'm Maria. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's a really great event, and there's you look like sardines, very beautiful sardines. So I work at Breakthrough Energy, and for those of you that aren't familiar, we're a network of philanthropic, policy, and investment initiatives founded by Bill Gates in 2015 with the sole purpose and objective of getting to net zero emissions by mid-century. So we end up focusing on basically the hard stuff, right? What's left in the economy to help decarbonize, and thinking about how we can use innovation as an instrument to get further solutions in those areas and getting them deployed as quickly as possible, bringing down the green premium, that sort of good stuff. With that out of the way, I mean, I think what's keeping me in hydrogen, as I joked, was the intrigue of everything going on that we're waiting for. All the new policies we saw come through last year to support clean hydrogen development and deployment. But really, I mean, very much aligned with my current job at Breakthrough Energy. By the way, I'm on the policy and advocacy team at Breakthrough. I'm a director on the team. Innovation really is kind of what energizes me every day. It keeps me excited about solving climate change and keeping a positive outlook on it. And hydrogen is certainly a space where there's a ton of innovation going on, where there's more innovation needed of all varieties, of the technology kind, of the policy kind, of the partnerships kind. It really is a place where there's a lot going on, but so much more left to do. And so that really keeps me excited about doing more and more hydrogen work in the future, and there's certainly no shortage of hydrogen issues. So.
Never a boring day. I think we would agree with that. Traci, over to you.
Thank you. So hi there, I'm Traci Kraus. I lead federal government relations at Cummins. For those of you who aren't familiar, Cummins is the world's largest engine manufacturer. We're most known for diesel truck engines. Pretty much every single truck you see on the road has either a Cummins engine or a Cummins-made component in it. So we are over 100 years old and really known for diesel primarily. But many years ago, we took a look around at our product portfolio operating globally and thought how to decarbonize these hard to abate sectors where we operate. And hydrogen just became such a clear answer to many of these tough duty cycles that our trucks are operating in, the long haul needs of the trucking industry, mining, construction, chemical, all of these hard to abate sectors, hydrogen was a really clear solution. So how did I get involved? Well, about 5 years ago, Cummins and our former CEO decided to join the Hydrogen Council, and they said, we need some policy support, who can do it? And everyone knows, I think we've heard the stat, right? Women are less likely to volunteer for a job or to go after a job if they don't feel like they already have all the skills and know all the information. Well, I was familiar with that stat and I knew nothing about hydrogen, and I said, I'll do it. So I thought, I'm not gonna sit on the sidelines. It seems like an exciting thing. And so I spent the better part of my last 5 years really learning every single thing I can, participating in the hydrogen policy landscape primarily here in DC, but I've also gotten the opportunity to do that globally and in Brussels, and it's been such an exciting time to be in hydrogen, and especially, I think the challenge of decarbonizing these hard to abate sectors has been, for me, what's keeping me here. I am always learning. I feel like I'm never as up to date or as knowledgeable on all the things I should be, and so it is a constant intellectual and challenge to continue to learn and to innovate and to participate in these conversations. So that's a little bit of how I got here and why I stay here.
Wow, I didn't even know that part of the story. That's very impressive. Linda, over to you.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Linda. I'm with CF Industries. So I've spent decades here in Washington, D.C. This is where I operate. In law, working on Capitol Hill, working with businesses, primarily in the agriculture and manufacturing spaces. A master of all, perhaps not a specialist in any one sector. And in late February of 2020, yes, that 2020, I joined CF Industries, the world's largest ammonia manufacturer, with most of that ammonia going into nitrogen fertilizer. We were really focused on that ammonia molecule, NH3 for the non-chemists in the room, on the nitrogen part that helps feed half the world. And so here I was going to be working with a manufacturer whose primary customer was in the agriculture space. And there was that little disruption of not being able to travel because I was hired as the head of public affairs. I'm on the senior management team. I'm a board officer for the company. And I was expecting to be back at headquarters every few weeks with my colleagues, all of that. That little COVID thing, moving on. But during that period as well, one of the things that our company did was we committed to our net zero journey. And ammonia is one of the most energy intensive, trade exposed, don't get me started on that issue, industries out there. But we committed to get to net zero on our production emissions, announced a electrolytic plant at our large Donaldsonville facility, and subsequently we have a major carbon capture sequestration project already in process being constructed, also at that Louisiana site where we're going to be capturing and with ExxonMobil permanently sequestering 2 million tons of CO2 a year. We're going to make a real difference, right? Very quickly on a large scale for our emissions, and we think there's a lot of excitement there as we look at other industries that we can decarbonize, not because of that end molecule, but because of the hydrogen molecule that we also produce at scale. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on from policy, domestic policy here, what we're seeing in Asia, around the world, trade flows, CBAM, all of these are tough, nitty issues, and it's just exciting to be part of it.
Amazing. And these are just 3 of the 500 or so women we have as part of our network, so I said they were going to be impressive. Let's talk about hydrogen hubs and 45V, anyone? Or let's rather not. And I think that is the very point of this panel. And Maria actually inspired that. She wrote a blog post about 45V, how we're spending all of our living hours and brains and energy on 45V and speculating when and how it may come out, and hydrogen hubs the same. So it feels like those two announcements are the end of the world. And in fact, they're just the beginning, right? They're just two of the fundamental building blocks that we need to help the industry get off the ground here in the US. So with your permission, and knowing that you have spent the last 2 days on these two topics, we will actually try to ignore them on this panel, if that's okay, and try to look beyond. So what else do we need? And once, hubs are out and 45V guidance is clear, like, what will we do the day after? Like when we wake up in the morning, and we will not be spending all of our times on those topics. Maria, I'll start with you.
The next day I'll be reading whatever comes out of the guidelines, but maybe a few weeks later. No, I joke. I think about this question in a sort of from a temporal perspective. There's this kind of stuff we need to do right now to help support projects that are trying to get off the ground now, get commitments going, increase uptake. And then there's a sort of the stuff we need to do to ensure that in the longer term, we're building an economy that can actually, a hydrogen economy that can support what will hopefully be a global traded commodity, right? And so, by the way, the near term and longer term stuff need to be done at the same time. It's like chewing gum and walking. But I like that temporal framework because it really does kind of bifurcate the different needs. And so on that sort of near term bucket, we're thinking a ton about end use support, right? Because these two policies Ivana mentioned are very, innovation and supply side oriented. They're really going to stimulate, hopefully, hydrogen production and lower the cost. And that's really, really important. But as we look towards decarbonization of these sectors where hydrogen can play a really prominent role, the question becomes, okay, well, what do those end use sectors have as barriers to increasing that uptake, right? So those long-term commitments, the kind of contracts that are needed to actually build facilities and think about what special policies and partnerships are necessary to overcome those things. And those are unique. I mean, Linda and Traci can certainly cover how they vary by ammonia versus, transportation use. So that demand-side support is a crucial piece for us. And then we're also thinking about, in the longer-term bucket, how do we move hydrogen once we actually start producing it at large volumes, right? I think a lot of the projects we might see coming from these announcements in the hubs and the projects that have already been announced today, thankfully, a lot of the production is co-located with the use, which is really efficient. And as we scale, there's going to be a desire to move hydrogen, to store hydrogen, and there's lots of ways to do that. You can pipeline it, you can truck it. That impacts the cost, which impacts uptake and where it's used. And so there's going to be a lot of conversations that are going to have to be had around those things that we're keeping a very close eye on. And then at some point, you got to go back to government and say, here's, provide regulatory clarity on which government agency even has authority over, pure hydrogen pipelines, for example. And so there's hydrogen infrastructure. And then I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the sort of other energy infrastructure that's crucially important, because at Breakthrough Energy in particular this year, in addition to hydrogen, we are trying to scream at the top of our lungs about transmission.
We have all read Bill's blog post.
Yeah, I mean, all roads lead back to the grid. And it's really, it sounds histrionic, but it's kind of a crisis at this point, how unprepared we are. The interconnection queue is all backed up. We don't have enough transmission lines to move all that power, and electrolyzers, they run on that power. And so we're really thinking about how to expedite and increase the speed and scale at which we're building transmission line. So there's also that ancillary energy infrastructure. And then the final thing I'll say is all of the hydrogen economy is wrapped in an envelope of the macroeconomic conditions which we're living in, and it's, interest rates are really high, the cost of capital is really high, and that really certainly impacts how projects get built and how quickly, and it'll, we'll have to see in a few years what the uptake of these tax credits is, and beyond the guidelines, whether, the tax equity market and these new transferability instruments are sufficient to have access to the kind of capital we need to build stuff, and figure out where the gaps are, and work backwards to fill it out together. So that's kind of my 30,000 foot view of what's keeping us up at night at Breakthrough about hydrogen. And then, I'll let these fine ladies fill in the gaps because there's just frankly so much to cover. So
That's a pretty long list already. Traci, what would you like to add to it?
Absolutely. So I should mention that at Cummins, we've created a new business unit called Accelera by Cummins. You may have seen our green booth. I know folks were looking for a red booth from Cummins, but Accelera is our zero emissions technology brand. And so we make both electrolyzers that produce hydrogen, fuel cells that consume it. We also make hydrogen internal combustion engines that can use it. So there are certainly policies for each one of those technologies that will be critical. For example, the EPA's Clean Commercial Vehicles rule will recognize hydrogen in internal combustion engines as a zero-emission vehicle for the purposes of fleet averaging. So things like that will be really critical to incentivize near-term offtake and demand. But I would like to really think bigger picture, and you mentioned a lot, but one thing that is kind of the holy grail that we think about is the importance of a price on carbon, an economy-wide price on carbon that would create all the signals needed to build out transmission and distribution, to produce the hydrogen and to consume it in the areas where it would be the most cost-effective and efficient. So I think we can't, it's become kind of unpopular or not stylish to talk about a carbon tax. But I think it is really the best and most efficient way to account for the negative externalities of our current way of doing business. And so I try to talk about it every chance I can, because we need to create the political impetus to say this is really the best and most efficient way to decarbonize the economy and get the investment in all of those places that not any one of us in our industries can think of every single roadblock along the way. But if you create the incentive structure to maximize the flow of capital to those places, pricing in that negative externality, not to get all Econ 101 on you, that will be, I think, we can't lose sight of what a critical tool that really would be to really take off.
That's such a great insight, Traci, because I admit myself, I tend to live in my hydrogen bubble, and with every new challenge, I go deeper, 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 deeper into the granularity of the solution. And we shouldn't forget that, our hydrogen world exists in the broader world, and, wouldn't it be wonderful to set up a rule that will help us all move in the same direction, and then let innovators, entrepreneurs, and businesses solve some of these problems. So thank you for bringing us back out of the depth of the hydrogen world. Linda, what else is on your bucket list?
So when I think about this, I think about the economics and the commercial viability at the production side, the midstream infrastructure, and the demand side. So we're a pretty capital-intensive manufacturer like Cummins. So as we look at, and we've got 2 FEED studies for 2 new plants that would be export-oriented to tap into power gen markets in Japan, to tap into steel and other markets in Korea. As you look at that new capital investment, you're looking at a return on investment period of 20 to 25 years. You've got tax credits that are 10 or 12 years, 45V and 45Q. You've got short-term policy. You've got vicissitudes of policymakers and elections and all of that. You don't have the certainty. And that's where I absolutely agree with Traci, having the certainty of a price on carbon. But in the globally intensely traded world in which I live as an ammonia and fertilizer producer, it's got to be global. Because the trade rules right now, if you're a commodity producer, they favor trade in carbon-intensive products because that's the cheapest product to make. So how do you grow the demand for those low zero-emission products in a more certain world? And part of that is global carbon pricing. But you've got the demand, and I'm going to come back to the midstream infrastructure in a minute. But you've got to have the demand, right? The farmers who buy our products are themselves commodity producers competing with everybody else who may or may not be paying more for low emissions fertilizer as we think about this. So we've got to think about these end-to-end solutions. We've got to draw the demand. Right now we're seeing a lot of interest in clean ammonia. You've probably done some other panels here. Replacing part of the coal use in Japan, other parts of Southeast Asia with ammonia co-firing, massive impact on the global emissions. If you could replace 20% of coal in power generation globally, that would be a gigaton of emissions you would avoid every single year. And that's just at 20%, and people believe you could go farther. There's looks at this in terms of hydrogen and ammonia as potentially the fuel for maritime, right? And think about those things. But you've got to have that certainty on your demand side if you're going to build that plant, if you're going to invest for that period of time. And when you're doing it, you need the infrastructure. We talked about transmission. You know, we're doing both electrolytic hydrogen with electrolyzers. We're also doing carbon capture. Carbon capture is going to be the biggest, fastest way for us to make a dent. But then you need those CO2 pipelines. You need those Class 6 wells. You know, Louisiana's been waiting more than 2 years to get primacy. Hopefully we're going to get there by the end of the year so that they can make sure that they review these applications, ensure safe and secure permanent sequestration, right? That's what we all want to see because we want the right solution here. And then the last piece I will mention is certification. I know there was a panel on ammonia and maybe other certification things. We need that verification of the carbon intensity. And we need it in a way that everybody agrees to. Producers and end users want it. Governments are going to want it. We're going to need that to work. And so, you know, we others are working on that, and hopefully we're going to see that move in tandem with the policies.
Great points, and we could add permitting, we could add community support. We know that there are 3 or 4 projects here in the US already facing delays, lawsuits, and what have you because of that sort of public education and public support point. And Linda, I will pick up on one of the points you raised, and that is the political cycle, the election cycle, right? So the volatility that comes with changes in government, and while we may have an administration that is extremely clean energy friendly or energy transition friendly, we may not be in the same position in what is it, a year from now? Almost a year and a bit from now. So as we head into the big election year here in the US, and I'm not asking you to speculate on the outcome, but how do we sustain that incredible level of bipartisan support that we have seen for hydrogen? It truly is stunning to see that we have people across the entire political spectrum who can see themselves in that hydrogen opportunity. Now, how do we make sure that now that money is actually seriously flowing, that does not spoil some of those friendships? Because, you know, that's a whole new level. Right now there's money at stake, oversight, you know. These are moments of, you know, that can be turned into political leverage, and things get really ugly very quickly. So maybe, Traci, you were smiling at me, so why don't I start with you?
Never smiling again. No, I think, you know, one of the attributes of hydrogen that I think engenders this great political support is that it is such a versatile molecule. So I mentioned, you know, one of the dynamics that we've seen at Cummins and Accelera by Cummins is that we get Democratic support because we are making green hydrogen in a Cummins, Accelera by Cummins electrolyzer from renewable resources. And then we can actually run it in an internal combustion engine, which really protects a lot of that workforce that the Republicans who represent our current manufacturing plants in Indiana and North Carolina and South Carolina support just that continued investment in internal combustion to keep cleaning it up, continued innovation. It also helps the workforce there both continue to work on the internal combustion architecture that they know while reskill on fueling protocols, safety protocols with a new fuel. So we really see some of these bridge technologies as critical to our workforce, but also to getting that political support across the full spectrum because this hydrogen is a tool, and it's a tool to decarbonize, as I mentioned, in these hard-to-abate sectors. And because it's such a versatile tool, it allows us to really go where the opportunities are and grow jobs and continue to invest. And that just happens to also get political support for the good work we're doing. So also hydrogen, compared to some other clean energy technologies out there, you know, there's an element of energy independence that's really critical for hydrogen producers that you don't see in some of these other technologies that might have been developed in other places with geopolitical concerns. So I think the energy independence angle is really critical. So it's American innovation, and that people seem to like that.
I would agree with that. Maria, why don't you have a go? And again, no need to predict the outcomes, but rather...
I wouldn't dare. I would not dare. I totally agree with what Traci said. I mean, I think that everyone has a role to play in ensuring that there is that longer term support. If you're a hydrogen producer, if you're involved with its use, engage the beneficiaries of that hydrogen economy, right? My good friend Alex is here, who's been thinking a lot about community engagement, right? As we're building new projects, and there's going to be a ton of them, how does the community that's around it interact with that project? How do we ensure that there is positive outcomes for everybody involved in that supply chain, including the folks in those communities? And then that sort of ladders up to the DC machine, right? The politics of this. The members that voted for this thing can decide to vote it right back out, and that would be such a disaster for the entire economy, because you can't really make long-term capital commitments if you have that sort of fear of policy whipsawing very suddenly. And so for the storytellers, folks that are in media, companies, PR, I mean, like, shout it into the wind what those workforce opportunities are. There's so much that, like, the unions can come out and say, like, yeah, we're excited about these jobs. We want to be employed by this commodity and be beneficiaries of this. And so I think telling those good stories so those members can kind of see that there is really good economic activity for everybody in their district and in their state is really ultimately what it's going to take to protect these in the long term, alongside implementing them well, of course. And so I would say all of you in this room definitely have some role to play in ensuring that we hold on to these in the long term.
So do good work and talk about it. And Linda, I'll give you the the final word on this question. And before I do, I just want to invite all of you. We have roughly 5-6 minutes for any questions from the audience. So I'll be right back to you after Linda's final word.
So, I've spent all of my professional career working here in Washington, D.C. And, sometimes if you're watching cable news or you're on social media, and you're thinking these big partisan divides and people don't get along. I mean, when I worked on the Hill, we got along best of all with our colleagues who were on the other side of the aisle. But if you look at it and you're talking to members, you're talking to their staffs, you can find an area where everybody agrees. Everybody wants economic benefits, good paying jobs, safe and growing communities, and a clean environment. Right? And that's what we start with. And we talk about the potential for growth and the things that are of interest. And I think if that's the way we're approaching it, we're not approaching it with an ideology here or there, but we are doing it. And I think both Traci and Maria and Ivana talked about one of the biggest pieces of that, and that's community. Right? And, we can't roll over communities. We can't litigate through these problems. We've got to bring our communities with us through real, authentic engagement. We've got to do it right. We've got to implement these projects through all pieces of them safely and in a beneficial way. And that's what's going to help breed that support and showcase that we can do it right. And so we have projects, everybody here is working on projects where we're going to try to say, see, we can do this in a way that benefits locally, that benefits nationally. Yeah, there's national security issues, there's other issues out here that are going to have benefits, but I think we do have to start at that ground level and find the common ground and stick to it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Linda. So we have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Raise your hands. Say who you are, who you're with, and then ask a question, please. Bill Ellerick.
Bill Ellerick, the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Partnership. It'll be a quick one. I tax on carbon. I love it. I feel like in these circles, we always come to it. Why aren't we getting there? Is it politicians in the end know that'll kill them in the short run? Is it industry in the end goes, same idea? I can't figure out why we're not there.
I'll take an initial pass. I think there's 2 major obstacles. One of them Linda spoke to, which is to really be effective and successful, it needs to be a global tax, right? Or a global pricing of the externality. that is politically very difficult, without calling it impossible. So that is one challenge, right? And we see it, I think we see some of the CBAM or carbon border adjustment mechanism, if you don't read this stuff every day. Some of the conversation there is absent a global price on carbon, how can you account for countries that don't have some taxing mechanism or some pricing mechanism, so when you're importing goods, they are adjusted for that price. So I think there are innovative ideas to address that. The second is that a pure carbon tax is inherently regressive. So again, getting a little bit Econ 101, but the people who can least afford to pay it, it will be the greatest share of their budget. And you cannot avoid that getting priced into the economy. And we're in an inflationary environment. And that would be a great way to ramp up that inflation if you're not adjusting for other tax policy, if you're not creating sort of a wholesale redo of your taxation method. And there are, again, some creative ways to address that. Do you start a low price just to get folks used to it, and then it buys you some time to make changes while still acclimating and still getting some of the transitionary benefits? But I think it is very hard politically, and I think as a society, to say that the people who can least afford, for whom energy, embodied or otherwise, is a pretty big share of their budget, to ask them to pay more, to ask them to pay for a problem that is seen as it's really a societal problem, but many folks see it as certain companies or certain industries that we're now paying for the pollution of others, which I think we all know that in a global economy, that's not how it works, but that's a tough sell. So those are some of the challenges. Maybe Linda can talk about some of the opportunities.
Just conscious of time, and I know this is such a complex issue. I think it's a great topic to continue during our meet and greet. So when we're done with this panel, we will still be outside. All of our panel speakers will be outside. Other members of the Women in Hydrogen Network will be outside, and we'll be delighted to continue the conversation. If we have one super quick question, I think we can still get it in over there.
I like the idea that you're talking about the carbon tax, and that in my opinion, it should be on like a sliding scale. Those who can afford it more pay more, and to create some equity. But the low-hanging fruit really is energy conservation, the way we farm, the way we eat, and just education in general. Youth, there's a big youth movement right now for climate, initiatives. And why aren't we building in more of that, topic into these discussions? I've heard very little about that throughout the last 2 days.
Just your name and affiliation for good order.
Susan Vogel from North American Hoganess.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Anyone feels particularly passionate about this one, or we leave it to the meet and greet? What do you prefer? Linda, did you want to jump in?
Look, we absolutely see that. I think any of us on the corporate side see the energy that new workers and prospective employees, right? They're looking at our companies for the change that we're talking about. I think you've seen the Biden administration announce, climate core, conservation core. I think you're seeing all of that. It's one of those things where there is so much to do, and we could spend hours on the agricultural food chain and how do we transform that. I mean, there's all sorts of things from a fertilizer perspective. There's even more when we're talking about some of the crops out there and the food companies and beyond. I think activating youth is part of everybody's, because they are our workforce for tomorrow. So I think it's part of it, and I think the networking that we're talking about and growing the community of supporters, whether you're a policy expert, whether you're an engineer, whatever, you're the business side, whatever you're doing, right, bringing everybody in there. But I feel like this is an area more broadly on hydrogen and climate change where there is so much to do that we need everybody. And so if we're not sounding inviting enough, let's all change that, because we do want to be inviting.
And you're reading my mind, Linda. There's so much to do. There's so much we need, all of you to do together. So just parting words, and I know we're almost on time, so 20 seconds each if you can. There's so much opportunity for women, people of all gender, but I think especially women in this space. We need practical, action-oriented solutions. So your advice for women in this space. Linda, I'll start with you and move this way. What should women with interest in hydrogen be thinking, doing, any learnings?
Obviously join Women in Hydrogen, but no, get involved in something that's outside of your normal day job and really learn about it. That's exciting to you, that's fascinating to you, and see what those opportunities bring. Because I think it's, for me, combining all aspects of my career and ending up where I am now and much more focused on hydrogen and this space, there's a lot of good things that I learned along the way that are really helpful now. So learn as much as you can, become involved in something else that's not your day job.
Traci. I would echo a lot of that. I think it's really being curious and never stop asking questions. And I think sometimes, especially as a woman, or it's certainly something I've felt, that if you are a younger person in the room, or you're the only person that looks like you in the room, you hesitate to ask the question because you don't want to appear that you don't know what you're talking about, or you're insecure, or any of those things. Asking the questions and learning and continuing to be vulnerable in those situations is, I think, the surest way to not only learn more, but also to help others along the way. Because I can't tell you the amount of times people have come up to me afterward and said, I had that same question, but I didn't want to ask. And so I think we just all need to ask those questions and show what it's like to be out there and learn and be vulnerable, and we're all going to be better for it.
+2 to curiosity, for sure. And I will say hydrogen can feel intimidating, but the great aspect of it is that it's a part of the energy system, which means it interacts with so many things that no matter what you do now and what you're interested in, there's almost certainly a slice of the hydrogen pie that could be your specialty, your niche, and that you can sort of grow into. And so no matter if you're a chemist or not, there's certainly lots of room for people to come into the hydrogen space.
I love it. Did you realize we just created 3 C's? So it's creativity, curiosity, and connection. And I think that's the spirit of Women in Hydrogen. Thank you so much for joining the panel. As I mentioned earlier, we will continue with a little meet and greet. Our panelists and other members of the network will be just outside for you for just a couple more minutes. And we have events coming up in Houston in a week from now, so please join us. Always wonderful to see you.